someone who's an amputee, someone who's blind, who's deaf, someone.
Somebody's legs get cut off and they can't walk. What part of this is like reject? What do you reject about this? Deaf people can't hear, right?
Yeah, but they can still communicate.
But there's nothing they can do to get around not hearing. There is a part of the
yes,
world.
Yes, they can. They can write.
Do you believe that there is some idealized form of a human body?
No. So if someone had 3 arms, would they be disabled?
Sure.
It wouldn't make it positive.
I'm going to give you the classic Destiny analogy. Well, correct, because the function of a human man doesn't include giving birth.
Okay, what about people who are intersex? Why?
I don't. That's a good question. Ask God. You got Duck or Zed.
Wait, hello? Oh, there we go.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Tired.
Okay.
Listen, I don't know when you talked about this. I'm very behind on everything usually, but someone linked me like a clip of you looking at my tweet. I'll send it to you on Discord in case you want to pull it up too. What is this? There's no video. What? Okay, weird. There, I linked it to you.
Yeah, what's up?
So you said that my positions, I think, were like patently false or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think you did like 1 or 2 tweets that I think I could have agreed with, but then I think we got way too off into the
But as far as I know, this is the only tweet I really did about disability and social construction. So the first one was disability, in quotes, is a social construction. Any account to link disability to actual physical ability fails. And then
that's the one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So like when it comes to neurodivergence and calling some of these disabilities, I could conceive of other social worlds where it wouldn't be. The obvious example being things like ADHD or maybe even autism. But I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Well, like just for the sake of discussion, let's actually just limit it to physical disability.
Yeah, so for physical disability, I think we have
let's just focus on that.
Yeah, I think we can have a fact-based accounting where we're like, yeah, this is like, we can link this to an inability for your body to perform some act.
Okay.
That would make it disabled, yeah.
So first of all, I'm talking about the category of disability in general.
Okay.
Like the actual category of which a bunch of things would fall. Like, someone who's an amputee, someone who's blind, who's deaf, someone who
because I'm putting 100%,
from, disability related to long-term constant pain. The idea that we can combine all these things, call them disability, and say what makes them a disability is a lack of physical ability. That's what I fundamentally reject.
Okay, so I guess then the obvious thing would be like somebody's legs get cut off and they can't walk. What part of this is like reject? What do you reject about this? Or
well, okay, so let me start off by saying that, like, I guess for ease of conversation, I think we should try to define what we both think disability is, right? So how would you just define disability as a general category?
I think that there is kind of like an optimal, or there are kinds of optimal functionings of the human body. I think that a lot of parts on the body have like a specific purpose. I think when the purpose of some of these parts is either inhibited or made impossible, then I would argue that that is a disability. So for an example, like a muscle can contract and it can cause a limb to move around a joint. And when you don't have the ability to do that, we would consider that some form of disability, I guess.
Okay, and let me start off by saying I think I want to draw an analogy. Like I essentially view gender sort of in the same way as disability.
True, women are. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I mean, it's sort of that's almost exactly what I was going to say. Well, not exactly, but the fact that I'm a man, right, and I'm incapable of giving birth. That is, in a sense, me lacking the ability to do something. Why doesn't that qualify as a disability under your view? Because that's clearly a lack of ability.
Yeah, because your body isn't built to do that. You have a different function for your body, right?
But if someone is born without sight, why do we want to say that they, like, what is it about intrinsically about having sight that is like the natural purpose of the human body? Like, I don't, the idea of tying...
I think that we could create, I think an
is dangerous.
Aristotelian idealized version of a human male body and a human female body, where like you have sense organs that collect sense data that should be functioning. not having eyes inhibits your ability to ever see anything, which I think we could say is a disability. But you literally have parts of your brain that are able to process visual information, and now you can't feel. Like, that seems obviously to be a disability to me. But, or wait, maybe Plato, not Aristotelian. Sorry, but go ahead.
Well, let me envision for you like a society, because if we're posing a definition of disability and what a definition of disability should be in general, we should be able to, in a sense, define, like, just imagine society where 99% of people are born without sight, right? So all of society would essentially be built around this, the lack of sight, and perhaps someone who's born with sight would actually be probably considered disabled in this society, because society for them is not structured in the same way.
I disagree. I don't think that would ever be the case. But
you can't imagine a society where being blind would be or where not being blind would be an advantage, or having sight would be a disadvantage.
well, maybe if you lived on like a sun or something, I guess, and being blind or being able to see blinded you, maybe, I guess. But
Okay, well, like I disagree.
I'm trying to
with
think of,
my-
here's something that I'm trying to compare this to.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wire this into real life. Usually when people are given like extrasensory abilities, usually those are seen as advantages and not disabilities. So for instance, I think some people have a fourth rod that I think can enable them to see a few more colors than other people. But I've never in my life heard somebody say like, oh, this person is kind of disabled because they can see an extra color, or they have another ability in their body.
Would you say that normal functioning, because I mean, you're giving probably the most famous account of what disability is, which is the one I try to push back against, which is like the idea of normal functioning, right? And like, for example, is normal functioning supposed to be a good definition because of its relation to survival, for example?
I guess maybe I'm almost being naturalistic here, but I think that like when I look at a human body, there are functions that it is obviously designed to perform, and if it is unable to perform some or all of these functions, then there's some form of disability there. So like if I have like a lever that moves around a thing, or if, like or an axis that twists or whatever, if it's not able to do that, then it seems like there's a function that it can't perform despite being designed to do so.
Okay, well, so it's not simply just deviation from the norm. It has to be, in a sense, a negative departure from normal functioning, right?
Yeah, something that, yeah. So like, for instance, being able to see doesn't inhibit any of your other senses, or being able to see an extra color doesn't make something worse or whatever, right? That's just like an added bonus, I guess.
So if someone had 3 arms, would they be disabled?
If somebody had 3 arms, would they be disabled? Oftentimes they are, but it's not because they have the third arm. It's because they lose the ability to accurately control either arm. But I think if you genuinely had 3 arms and you had perfect control over all of them, I'm not sure if people would consider that person disabled or not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's an important question though, right? Because like
It's hard to make a lot of these analogies work, because oftentimes when we have like the presence of like a 6th finger or toe or like an extra arm, usually everything is inhibited. Usually it comes with a whole host of other problems. It's either incredibly rare or impossible to get an extra limb that is fully functional.
I mean, the fundamental issue is that, like, as soon as you want to depart from normal functioning, right? Because normal functioning or lack of normal functioning for a species as being the definition of disability clearly doesn't work. Because if we consider people like Michael Phelps or other, very famous athletes who deviate from the norm, we don't consider them disabled, because actually, if anything, that seems to be almost an advantage to them. So we have to bring in the notion of a negative deviation from the norm, in which case, all of a sudden, it's no longer naturalistic, because that's clearly a value-laden term that we're bringing in which case, that seems to it's no longer simply biological account. It's incorporating something more.
Well, nothing is simply a biological account, right? Because even naturalistic assumes some amount of normativity, because I'm saying that since a body is designed to do something, it ought to do something, right? Or even assuming that there is a design, I think arguably you could say that you have to get a little, you need more to get that off the ground than to just look at a body, right? To make other statements. But I think, I don't know how you would phrase it philosophically, but I think that I would argue that there's some obvious construction where we can see that the body is designed to do certain things. If you want to add things onto that and say, well, look, these things deviate, typically those deviations are thought of as negative because they inhibit some other function. But so long as they don't inhibit another function, they might be considered like advantageous. So if we say that like an average male penis is 5.5 inches long or whatever, right? And we say, well, what if I have one that's 8 inches long? Oh, well, cool, that's awesome. Well, what if I have one that's 20 inches long and every time I get an erection, I pass out? Okay, well, now it's no longer awesome. Even if you have a really big dick. Now every time you get an erection, you pass out. It's inhibiting some other function, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we agree that it can't be just, it can't just simply be a deviation from the norm,
Mm-hmm.
right? It has to be some sort of negative deviation. You seem to be pointing to lack of ability,
Yeah.
right? Disability has to be a lack of ability to do something in virtue of some trait that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what you're going to say to this, but this
Yeah.
is just sort of going down a path. Like, what if you, for example, are black during the Jim Crow era?
Mm-hmm.
Because of your skin color, you are going to have a much rougher time and lack certain abilities that white people do because of the color of your skin, right? But you wouldn't consider being black at that point in time as a disability, right?
Yeah, so this is why I wanted to focus more on physical disabilities, because I think when you get to stuff like ADHD...
Well, that's still a physical...
Kind of. So hold on, let me build there.
Okay.
When we talk about things like ADHD or autism, it's harder for me to say like, oh, well, these are disabilities. Now, some forms of autism, I would argue, absolutely are. But for higher functioning autism, or for things like ADHD, I would say I could easily conceive of worlds where these people are not only useful, but potentially fill really important roles. Maybe people with ADHD are way more physically oriented. Maybe these are the hunters in a society. Or maybe people with autism that are high functioning autism, maybe these people are more meticulous when it comes to basket weaving. I don't know. Right? I could conceive of worlds where like these people fill actually incredibly useful roles, but it doesn't really work societally. So I have a harder time pathologizing those things. When I look at like black skin and I say, okay, well, is black skin, is this a disability because it's a deviation that causes a harm? I think that the harm that's being incurred there is a social harm. It's not something that happens by virtue of the color of the skin, right? Where like there are some forms of harm we can argue result directly from the color of the skin. So for instance, we might say like, well, having white skin in very sunny environments might be some kind of disadvantage because you're losing a little bit of SPF in your skin, right? You sunburn easily. But like for socially constructed harms, I think it's different to pathologize those things as being disabilities. Yeah.
Okay, so I led with like the most extreme example.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
An extreme hypothetical having to do with lack of ability to see. And I asked whether there could be a society where actually having the ability to see would count as a disadvantage. So let me sort of go to like one that's perhaps less controversial than that. Someone, for example, who was quite short. If someone, for example, is, let's say, 4'5", is that relatively short? Like
that would be pretty short, yeah.
Yeah, that would prevent people from doing a lot of everyday tasks that other people are able to do. Are those people disabled?
Okay, so we have to talk very carefully about this subject. When we're talking about short, I'm going to assume for the purpose of this conversation, you are only talking about a person's height, but everything, we're not talking about dwarfism or anything that might like have some other penalty. Yeah, just height. Yeah, so I would say that just height alone probably doesn't reach the level of disability because because all of the harms there are going to be socially constructed. For instance, we could conceive a world where we make countertops and everything for people that are short and everything. Yeah.
And so what about a society where everybody, let's say for people who are deaf, where everyone speaks fluent sign language?
And where everybody is deaf.
Yeah, everyone is able to communicate using ASL.
What are you asking that? If somebody that has hearing would be considered disadvantaged?
Yeah, I'm trying to, you pointed to the fact that we could make shorter countertops in a society as pointing to it's the social limitations that are making this thing a disability rather than you say it's not a disability because there are social features that could change to prevent, those kind of challenges. So,
yeah, I don't see how like somebody that has hearing born into that society would be considered disadvantaged.
No, forget about that. I'm saying imagine, because right now we consider being deaf to be a disability. So what if we lived in a society where everyone is able to communicate fully in ASL?
Then would being deaf
would that still be considered a disability under your...
Yeah, it would be, of course.
Well, they lack an ability, I agree, but why is that ability intrinsically harmful if society has been constructed in a way to fully accommodate them?
If society has... Okay, so if we theoretically construct a society to fully accommodate them, if the human body had no faculty in it for hearing, then I guess it would just be a normal human. But if you could hear, but otherwise you couldn't, I mean, technically we could accommodate any number of disabilities in society, but
Yes.
that doesn't mean that the body isn't missing some ability that used to be like a fundamental part of it. So we could construct a society with enough wheelchair ramps or whatever that would make it fully accessible to a person that has no legs, but like a person with legs, as the human body generally has, is still going to have an advantage. Much the same way that even in a fully deaf society that totally accommodates all deaf people, a person that can hear is going to have a big advantage. He can communicate without having to look at somebody, or it can be communicated with without having to look directly at somebody. He's able to like access parts of the world that other people can't access. Like they would just have an advantage.
Yes, but so there might be an advantage, but is that not an advantage in the same way that someone who is 4'5", in a sense, lacks an advantage, but not to the point where they become disabled?
No, because I think the advantage that they lack there, I think
How do
there's
you
a,
measure that amount of advantage that is enough to make it no longer?
it's like a
disabled?
fundamentally different. There's like, what is like a category of the world or something that is inaccessible to short people?
Unable to reach tall shelves.
I mean, you can climb. I mean, like the tall shelf thing. That's like a socially constructed. Like,
Yeah, and I mean, deaf people can communicate with others if they
deaf
write.
people can't hear, right?
Yeah, but they can still communicate.
But there's nothing they can do to get around not hearing. There is a part of the
Yes,
world.
they can. They can write.
No. Vibrations in the world as perceived by your eardrum are inaccessible
Yes.
to deaf people. They will never be able to listen to music. They'll never be able to hear something coming from behind them. They're totally unable to access that level of information in the world. I think that's fundamentally different than a short person that can't reach a shelf but could through other means, like you could use a stool or you could climb on something.
Yeah, but the purpose of communicate, or the purpose of speaking, is for communication. And if you're able to meet that end in a different way, such as through ASL or through writing, then what is the big deal?
Hold on. If you're asking me, can deaf people communicate similarly to people that can hear? That's true. But the purpose of hearing is not just communication. The purpose of hearing is to hear vibrations in the air, right? Is the sound? Is
What do
there's
you
the
mean
qual?
purpose?
There's as in the qualia, the experience of sound in your brain is something that it can be used for communication. It could also be used to listen to music. It could be used to hear things coming from behind you. It could be used for a whole host of things that aren't communication, right? Like I could learn to communicate without eyes or ears, right? You've got, Helen Keller, who lived in the Nazi closet. She learned that, right?
But again, it's not simply a lack of ability. We said it has to be an inherently negative lack of ability. So
well, I mean, it's inherently negative when compared to a functioning human that doesn't lack that thing, right?
Okay, so now this is a bit of a different question about, because you're tying disability as something that has to be inherently harmful. Okay. And
Well,
so
hold on, wait. I never said inherently harmful, because we could conceive of some disabilities
it has
that
to
don't.
be a negative deviation.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Like, you're losing the ability to do a particular thing that your body ought to be able to do.
Well,
Because we
you
can
said it
conceive
was
of a whole
more-
bunch of disabilities that don't have harm. Like you could probably be missing, for instance, most people could probably lose, I think, like their pinky toe and maybe their pinky finger, and not necessarily have a harm, but you're still losing some function. They're still like.
But would that be a disability?
Yeah, I would say so, because your body is not functioning in the way that it.
But what about someone who's 4'5" then? I don't necessarily understand where the difference between those two things.
What's the difference between being short or tall is there isn't, like, your body is still functioning in the way that it's designed. There's a spectrum
I mean,
of
I
height.
think as a
like,
short person, I'm able to do less things than missing a pinky toe.
maybe in a societally constructed way, but in terms of your movement through the world, not really.
Well, it's obviously not movement through the world that we are like I don't totally know if I understand like why that's somehow the qualification for disability.
I guess I'm like, I could design a robot that's capable of performing 5 functions, and then maybe it loses one of those functions, and then I can like design around that lack of function to do other things, right? So programmers do this all the time when they bastardize some things to make them work on things that they never should. So for instance, when we used to use HTML tables because nobody wanted to learn CSS a long time ago on the internet, you could get around it, but like just because you can compensate for a lack of a feature or compensate for something not functioning well doesn't mean that you haven't lost that function, I guess. I don't know how to...
When a woman reaches a certain age and is no longer capable of giving birth, do they become disabled?
No, because I think that's part of the natural function of a body, right? Like women, I don't think can remain fertile throughout their entire lives because I think you're at a biological disadvantage if you're constantly having periods older into your age and you can only produce so many eggs.
Okay. The problem I'm having right now is that we seem to sort of be going, and this is why I just keep asking because I'm just trying to pin down exactly where.
Okay, yeah, okay, hold on, wait. Let's, okay, yeah. I'll attack, okay? Because, okay. Do you believe that there is some idealized form of a human body?
No.
Why not? Okay, wait, no, wait. Do you believe that if I were to ask 99% of humans, or 95% of humans, they would say, yeah, there is some idealized form of a human body?
I think they might intuitively think that from the get-go, but once you actually talk to them and work them through what that means, they would come to realize it's wrong.
Okay. Do you think that, okay, so when you say there is no idealized form of a human body, what part do you think can't be idealized? Can you explain that to me?
Like what? Can you specify more specifically, like what part? Like, do you mean?
As in, I can give you a reference range for all human activities, and I could say that every single human body should reside within this reference range. Everybody should be able to contract their muscles in a certain way, stretch in a certain way, have a heart that beats a certain way, have brain patterns that are a certain way. They have a certain height. They have limbs that work, right? Like all of these things.
I don't think so. I don't think, no. Because I think, for example, someone could be completely unable to use their limbs, but in a certain society, using limbs would serve no advantage whatsoever. For example, if we've evolved, you've seen like some episodes of Star Trek and shit where everyone is just tapping into, do you understand what I mean by that? Where the use of moving around is actually just an expenditure of energy that you shouldn't be using at all, and we should just be completely confined to one place. And do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I guess it's possible, but I feel like...
But that's the point. That's the point, is because if we want to ascribe an essential definition to disability and tie it... Because you're essentially arguing for a form of essentialism, the idea of this ideal human body. And that's why I brought up the analogy with gender earlier, because I think the divorce that we've now seen, and you seem to accept, between sex and gender, I think we need to do the same thing with biology and disability.
But my divorce between sex and gender does not go as far as some people's would like them to, right? So like I can recognize sex and gender as distinct concepts, but I do believe that gender is a thing that exists somewhere in the brain. There is a fact of the matter about that. It doesn't exist in the ether that is to be waiting to be accessed by whatever Twitter that you find.
I don't remember that being the position you held when we talked about it with perspective philosophy last time. You seem like we both seem to agree that it was inherently a social construct that is very real, because social...
I think the performance of a gender can be socially constructed, but I think that it does like dip into some...
You think people are born women and born men?
I think there's a part of the brain that makes you that. I don't know if you're born that. It might be something that you develop through adolescence or your teenage years or something. But yeah, I think there is a part of the brain there. Have
you always held that?
Absolutely. I think there is absolutely a fact of the matter in the brain about you being a man or a woman. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I would just reject that.
Sure, that's fine.
On a multitude of bases. Okay, well, well, then obviously appealing to that analogy isn't going to do a lot for you. So that's fine. We can put that aside and go back.
Sure. I feel like we can clearly state that there is an idealized form of the human body where like things function in a certain way.
I don't even understand the idea of idealized, because each person is very different and has very different goals in life.
Nope. Hold on. Wait. I'm okay. I'm going to challenge you when you use words like this. So when you say each person is very different, I agree that there are differences in humans. Okay, but I'm going to...
I don't mean biologically different.
No. I'm going to appeal to something called a reference range. Okay. If I say that, does that make any sense to you, or do you want me to explain real quickly?
Oh, sorry. I was drinking water. No, I understand what you
mean. So we're all different. But like, I feel like when I say different, I mean like some people might be 5'12" and some people might be 5'7". But when you say different, you're like some people might have 7 arms and some people might have 1 arm, right?
But I'm not. But that's not what I mean. When I say we are different, I'm talking in relation to our goals and desires that we have. Nothing to do with physical.
Sure, I can agree with that. We have different aims in life, generally,
right, okay.
Maybe. Yeah.
So
okay.
If I was a woman, okay, and I fucking hate children. I have no desire to ever have children. In fact, having children would probably make my life worse off. For your idealized human, I would assume you would say an ideal woman is capable of giving birth. But idealized relative to society not something outside of society, because there are many people who have no interest in giving birth, and in fact, having to go
Yeah, okay,
through.
so I think that in these types of worlds, I think we can actually envision being able to give birth as almost a form of disability. But I would argue that this kind of supports my argument, because when you have people that really don't like a certain function of the body that seems to be like hardwired in, people will go through surgical routes to eliminate these disabilities. So for instance, if a woman really doesn't ever want to give birth, she'll get her tubes tied. If a man really doesn't want to give birth, he'll get like a surgery to snip his...
That's not a disability, though. I don't. You said that people go through lanes to get rid of their disability, but the ability to give birth is not a disability.
No, but well, that's
the
the...
be an ability.
Well, theoretically, I guess we could conceive of like if a woman really doesn't want to get pregnant, being pregnant, and
That's a disability.
I guess theoretically, yeah. If a woman,
Okay,
if that
so-
super doesn't line up with her aims in life.
Okay, then you completely agree with me here, because that is a part of the human function.
Yeah, but the problem is I
allows
can't
you-
conceive
hold on,
of...
Let me just
well,
finish. Let me
okay.
just. I know I've cut you off.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Because that is clearly something that you like. That's a very profound ability that people have. That probably is more worthwhile and, well, not useful. But you talked about this idea of like, whether the pinky toe and whether being high. I think the ability to give birth is going to have more of an impact on one's physical self than missing a pinky toe, for example. But giving birth is an ability that one has. So how could that, in a sense, be a disability?
Because of everything.
Losing everything.
Well, how can it not be a disability? Because giving birth is an arduous process that has a lot of negatives entailed to it as well.
No, but you don't have to give birth.
Well, no, but if you get pregnant, there's going to be a lot of negative stuff that has to be incurred there as a result of that.
Okay, so the disability now is now relative to one's goals.
I guess it theoretically could be, or there's like some function of the human body that is like betraying like your goal in life.
Right. So I don't understand.
This is why I said earlier, like I could envision a world where if everybody's blind, it's a bad thing. Or I'm sorry, hold on.
You said you couldn't conceive of a
I'm sorry.
world.
No, I said I could. Like if people all lived like on the surface of a star or something, and opening your eyes caused you excruciating pain. But it would be really hard to imagine that. But any world that we imagine here, okay, is going to be a world that is incredibly far removed from our own.
Yes,
so if
yes.
we wanted to get rid of our concepts of like what is a disability or whatever, the types of worlds that we're envisioning, you're not going to connect with 99.9% of people. And you're never going to be able to use an argument like, well, can't we conceive of a world where if everybody's blind, they're served better off, therefore people that are missing their fucking legs actually aren't disabled? I don't think that argument is ever going to connect, because people in the real world that are missing limbs or don't have the normal functions of the human body are... If I'm curious, I'll appeal to... Not to do this, but like... I am doing this. Can you give me like a real world example where a physical disability is somehow manifesting in a way that it's a positive for a person, where they wouldn't be better off otherwise? Like I'd be really curious if there was an example of that.
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Is there any way where a physical disability can exist in the real world where you're like, oh, well, actually, this could be a positive?
Is there a physical ability?
Physical disability that could be a positive, like he's crippled, but it's actually really good because now he skips lines at Disney World. Like what?
Yes,
but
this is sort of the second point of my tweet, which is that there's nothing intrinsically bad about disabilities, or the category of disability in general. And in this sense, this is, I know, where we will have the biggest disagreement, because I fundamentally believe. Well, I want to finish up the first question before we move on to that one. So, just going back to, because you talked about the idea of this idealized human, and I've now pushed back and said, well, no, I can't envision an idealized human because society can come in many, many different ways. Because you were essentially making an essentialist argument about what it means to be disabled. And you've now seemed to back away from that and instead say that, well, a disability is actually relative to one's own goals and desires. So that being pregnant, or capability of becoming pregnant, or for example, not being able to get pregnant, would be a disability depending on the society that one lives in. And
a little bit, but I guess my issue here is that these particular examples involve biological processes with incredibly negative drawbacks. I don't know.
Yes, I know, but those, but that's the thing, is the drawbacks themselves are not, like, they are
they're
not bad
they're
because of
biologically
lack of
negative for
ability.
the woman. It is, at least, maybe not for the man, but for the
What
woman
do you
it
mean
is.
biologically negative? I
As in,
mean,
you
what if a
undergo
woman doesn't
pain,
want to
you
give?
undergo discomfort, you undergo nausea, you have like a whole process where your body is uncomfortable and changing. Like, there is a physical like relationship there to negative things that the body's experiencing as a
But the
result of
point
being
is that
pregnant.
we wouldn't consider that a disability unless you actually want to expand the scope of disability so broadly as to be some physical condition that someone has that prevents them from doing something they want to do.
Sure.
And if
Okay.
that's
So
the
let's.
definition you want to give, that's actually, I think, more crazy than my own definition.
Okay. Sure. So okay, let's move past that. I want an example of a physical disability that you think could be advantageous.
Well, what? Okay, advantageous is a very loaded word. You
Or
don't
not
mean
advantageous,
biologically
but doesn't get
advantageous.
isn't just like strictly a negative.
Okay, sure. Like, let's just go for something like blindness. And this is moving on to the second part of my tweet, which is that there's nothing intrinsically bad about disability. I know everyone thought I'd go for autism, but I want to give myself a challenge and try
Yeah, you got a big
to
challenge
say
ahead of you. So how
yes.
the fuck is
So
being blind not just strictly a negative thing?
okay, so first of all, I will acknowledge that for most people, absolutely being blind would be a bad thing. No shit, right? I'm not going to try to sit here and that anyone who is blind, you shouldn't feel bad because there's nothing bad about it. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the category of blindness is not intrinsically bad. It is going to be bad depending on someone's own desires, someone's own goals in life, etc. We can read the testimony of a lot of blind people who say that given the option to get their sight back, they would not want to be blind, or they wouldn't want to regain their
Okay, but
sight.
how much of that
They
is
want to
because
remain
of the
blind.
actual like?
Hold on. Let me. I know what you're gonna say, of
Yeah.
course. Um, but there are a lot of people like just you should read a lot of the testimonies of these people who
I
describe
have
that.
mainly in deaf communities, and I find most of it to be pretty gross. But go ahead.
Well, what do you mean gross? Because again,
Because you're
I'm
being
not
held
sitting here.
hostage
I'm not.
by
Hold
these
on.
communities that have these disabilities that don't want to feel disabled
But
because
that's not
people
what
are
I'm
trying
doing.
to. That's what it feels
No.
like, though. Like, but go ahead.
But how can it feel like that to you when I specifically said that for almost all people, being blind is going to be harmful? I fully acknowledge that. And if someone becomes blind, that fucking sucks for them almost always. I completely agree with that. And the idea that we should guilt someone because they no longer want to be blind or because they no longer to be deaf, that's fucking stupid. And people should feel shitty for doing that. Right? But the reality is, there do exist people who are blind, who are deaf, that given the option wouldn't want to reverse that. And you can say that that's just, copium, right? But they
Toasted
describe
Ellis, I
very
need
real
two scrap.
phenomena that they
I desperately need two
experience
scrap, please.
as blind people, as deaf people, that they wouldn't get to experience otherwise. And so, yes, while there is that present local harm of being deaf, of being blind, the lack of ability to see, the lack of ability to hear. There are also local goods that they have. Like a lot of blind people talk about how they are very much freed from a ton of societal expectations that are foisted upon them having to do with appearance. They describe how that's an incredibly freeing and liberating experience. I don't want to like go into the idea of like the super crip, right? The idea that someone like Daredevil, who is no longer capable of seeing, but their sight or senses are heightened. I mean, that does exist, and some people talk about that being an advantage. And same thing for deafness. We can look at the community building that results from it. Like basically, what you want to do is just say that no, you're lying. And to me, uh, that seems to me more implausible than the alternative I'm giving, which is that some people are actually very happy being blind, are very happy being deaf. And that's not to argue that they don't lack some ability that other people have. It's just to point to the fact that different people have very different goals and desires in their lives. The fact that people talk about cancer, right? I would say having cancer is probably a disability, right? But if you read the testimony of a lot of cancer survivors, they say that undergoing cancer treatment and surviving cancer fundamentally shaped the way that they see the world, changed their values, made them appreciate life more. And would they go back and not have cancer from the get-go? They would say no, because the benefit that it brought to me outweighed the possibility of my death from cancer. Right. And again, I
Okay,
want to
being
say,
able to extract value from a negative situation doesn't make that situation negative. I'm going to hit you with the classic Destiny
You mean
analogy.
not good. You mean
Sure.
it wouldn't make it positive.
I'm going to
right?
give you the classic Destiny analogy. Would you argue that in some cases child rape can be okay because maybe the child develops a lot of resiliency, they learn how to navigate through difficult relationships, and they grow up being able to identify predators more efficiently as a result of surviving their child? So, like, for instance, we wouldn't always say that being raped as a child is a bad thing, and there might be some like handful. It feels like you can make the same argument for that.
But I don't think anything is intrinsically harmful or good. Like that.
But I don't think that just because you can extract some goodness out of an otherwise horrible situation doesn't make the situation not horrible. Or just because you can extract some value out of having a disability.
I never said that. I never said the situation is good or bad. I said that given the option to go back and not have cancer, they would choose to have cancer anyways because of the effect that it had on them in their lifetime.
So I mean, like I would say that one, this is probably a pretty rare take on cancer. I don't think this is the norm.
No, of course it's not.
Sure.
Of course it's not. But again, if you are giving an essentialist definition, so all I have to do with my position is to point out that there are situations that don't meet your definition, and all of a sudden it's no longer essentialist, and it's instead dependent upon societal factors, which is what my original tweet said. Right? Is that it's a social construction. It can be a social construction that is very, very consistent. But as long as I can point to cases that are not essentially biologically harmful, then my definition is correct.
Well, but they are biologically harmful. You're just able to extract some.
No, biological harm. Like again, harmful. You're trying to tie harm to biology, but I know you don't genuinely believe that. You can fully recognize that there are people who suffer from certain condition, like let me bring up something like autism, right? Like, if given the option, I would never fucking cure my autism.
Okay, I don't want to deal with autism because it's way more complicated there. That's why I'm trying to stick to physical disabilities.
Okay.
Or if you want to talk about autism, we'll talk about low-functioning autism, not high-functioning autism is the most boring conversation. I don't care about that. Let's talk about low-functioning autism.
Well, no, but I can at least speak to high functioning autism, right? Which I think is more valuable than me speaking to a disability I don't.
Yeah, but high functioning autism, the argument over whether it even is a disability is much more complicated and difficult.
Okay.
That's
so
right.
It's
like
the idea that high functioning autism might not be classifiable as a disability.
Sure, like somebody with Asperger's, for instance, like we wouldn't say is it
that is high functioning autism?
Yeah, but, in the U.S., yes, but like I'm just saying that like it's a different kind of conversation when you talk about mental things. Or like ADHD is a different like it's way more easy to conceive of certain like mental disorders that aren't necessarily considered disorders or personality disorders given a different type of society. But I think when it comes to like physical functioning of the body, I think that we're in a different classification of things, and I reject the idea that like just because some people can get some positive experience out of what is otherwise just a wholly negative thing, that means that experience is not like it's not like an intrinsically negative thing, I guess.
Oh, okay, no, I understand. The only reason I brought up like autism is because you're trying to see some biological things as inherently harmful, right? And I can agree that there are certain disabilities that always bring with them a local harm, right? It's but I still think that overall there could be a global benefit to certain disabilities. So
yeah, I guess like maybe one quality I would say is that like you could probably access all of those positives without having to endure that negative.
No, I mean I gave you examples of blindness that are clearly things that cannot be.
You can wear a blindfold. You can walk around with like really thick sunglasses that inhibit you from seeing anything. There are other ways to access that without not being able to see.
I don't know, because the example I gave with respect to blindness is okay, but someone who, for example, has like, would you not consider those people disabled too if they were permanently wearing, like, you're saying that they can become blind by choice?
Yeah.
Well, doesn't that kind of speak to my, like, they wouldn't be, would you consider them disabled if they're choosing to do it?
Oh, Jesus Christ, I thought he hid some shit. Would I consider them disabled?
Support my own point?
Well, no, because you still have access to it. But I mean, like, I'm saying that, like, you don't necessarily need to lose your sight to access that positive experience of, like, not judging people how they look or any weird shit like that or whatever.
Okay. I think I
Or like
understand.
deaf communities. Like you can build
But you're
communities
still
on all that.
sacrificing. But you're still sacrificing something. You're losing the ability to do something in order to gain a certain good, which is again that's sort of my point. Is that you're willing to suffer a certain kind of harm in order to take a different benefit. And if there is actually someone who would willingly choose to never see just so
Yeah,
that
but
they
we,
can
I mean, you can,
access
I
certain
think we would
benefits.
still classify this as like a kind of a disability, right? Like, if we're willing to endure a certain level of harm or restriction to access something else, we could still locally call that like, yeah, okay, I'm going to inhibit my function at this time to learn another thing. So yeah, like for instance, when you play Marco Polo in a swimming pool, right? You temporarily disable yourself to gain the enjoyment of playing that game in the water, right? But it's still considered like a disability. Like you can't see. It's a disability. But you do so because you want to have fun and play a game that you otherwise wouldn't be able to if you could see.
So again, but I would ask then, so a man is not disabled because they can't give birth, right?
Well, correct, because the function of a human man doesn't include giving birth.
Okay, what about people who are intersex?
Their bodies are fucked. I don't know. They have to figure that. That's I would consider that a disability probably because it's usually
You
well
think being
sometimes
sorry,
it goes yeah.
you think being intersex is always a disability?
I think it's a form of disability, sure.
Okay.
But I would even argue the same theoretically about, I mean, it's controversial to say, but even about trans people, I would argue that that's like a form of disability, where the function of your body is not matching ideally what you would want it to.
Okay. What about being gay then? Sure.
Is being gay a
That's
disability?
clearly a big barrier to my ability to procreate a child, which is clearly the functional process of a man.
Yeah, potentially. I think you get into weird
Oh
things there
no.
where I could view like being gay similar to ADHD or autism. I've heard, I don't know how supported this is by the data, but I've heard like Evo Psych arguments that in stressful environments you're more likely to produce a gay
Okay, well that's
child.
Evo
And
Psych.
there's the idea that like maybe gay people in a society serve like a certain function or purpose that would be like beneficial to a society or whatever. But I mean, it gets a little bit more fuzzy around the edges there, sure.
But those same arguments are used to justify like deaf people and blind people because of the diversity that it produces, and it forces society to be more accommodating in general.
I don't think
That's a
having to be
very
more accommodating to deaf or blind people is necessarily a good
so
thing. I
what
mean,
is the
maybe you can get
benefit of
some
gay
novel.
people from an
What?
Evo Psych perspective?
What is the what?
What's the benefit of like? Well, sorry, what is the so-called benefits to society that evolutionary psychology points to in gay people?
The that you have people that I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look. I don't remember something about like additional caretakers in a society that aren't like interested in procreating, so you have like more dedicated tribal support rather than just other people trying to have kids. But
Okay, so
I mean everything in Eva Psych is kind of whatever. But yeah.
so are you? But okay, let me just. Are you actually biting the bullet and saying that being gay is classifiable as a disability?
I don't know if that inhibits you from functioning in a normal way in society
Well,
or even
like, for
external
example,
society. I'm not sure. I mean, like it might be. It might. Hold on, real quick. Okay. It might inhibit something, maybe. But like, I would still say, and I don't want to appeal too much to common sense or self-evidence or whatever, that like being gay is far more a social factor than like a bodily disability where it's like some part of my body cannot function. Right, I think that this is a different class of thing, right?
There is a lack of because I cannot become aroused by a woman, or maybe I can because actually I don't know. Strictly speaking,
It's a way harder, like because technically a gay guy hasn't lost any function. You could still impregnate a woman. Like all the parts of your body could theoretically work the same way, right? Like
yes, but clearly there is a but I mean, come on, you can't like put a gay person who is very, very much gay and not at all sexually aroused by women. They are not going to be easily able to ejaculate into a woman.
yeah, I guess, but it feels like we're at a different level of like social functioning versus like being able to move parts of your body.
Okay,
It feels
then,
like a
okay,
different
then,
class
then
of
you
thing.
then what about intersex people? Why would you consider them disabled?
So
The difference
it's
between
hold on,
those
hold
two
on. Okay,
things
hold on.
are-
Jesus Christ! A lot of the things that you're bringing up oftentimes are bucketed with a whole bunch of other issues. If there was a world where an intersex person is born and every part of their body is perfectly functioning, then I guess that person necessarily wouldn't be disabled. But almost all the time, my understanding is that intersex people come with a lot of problems related to genitals, hormones, sexual expression. There's a lot of other things packaged with that. I don't think it's possible because we're sexually dimorphic and different parts of our anatomy grow into other things. You can't have a fully functioning and fully formed penis and a fully functioning and fully formed vagina because you don't have that. So it's like it's a different type of thing.
But you seem to be proving my point, which is that disability is inherently socially constructed. What we want to consider a disability is dependent upon the way society is.
Only when you're dipping into the more mental things like ADHD or gayness or something
what is
versus
mental about being intersex?
Well, no. Okay, hold on. Okay, if you want to stay on physical disabilities, we can do that. If you want to go to social things, we can do that. But we can't keep conflating the things, right?
No.
Intersex and being gay are two different things. They're fundamentally different things. I think they're of a different class of thing. There's a difference between like my body is developing in a way that is not functioning as the vast majority of human bodies do versus I don't socially engage in relationships the way the vast majority of people do. I think these are different classes of things.
Right. Okay. No, I understand the point you're making there, but I would just say like if someone is gay and they're not able to be physically aroused by women, I mean, is that not in a sense the body dysfunctioning in some way biologically?
I think when you
that's the only reason I was drawing.
Yeah, but if you tie that to biologically, then I think that everything becomes biological. So, for instance, if I see a person and I'm not really able to understand their emotions in a way that would cause like a corresponding increase in heart rate or cortisol or whatever, like as an autistic person not having a physiological, biological negative response, like you must. Okay, let's take a step back for a second, okay, and macro look at everything. Do you not feel as though there's a difference between I can't move my arm versus I can't get aroused by a woman? Or do you think that these two things are of a similar class of things? Because they feel to me like I can, like if I were to draw, if we were to do a notepad or a paint pad,
yes,
I could say like eyes don't work, leg doesn't work, muscle is torn. There's like class of things, and then on the other side I can draw like is autistic or is gay or is other types of social ADHD. These are more like social things. Like on one end, I have like an actual human body that if I were to put in a lab, it can't function in some way that it seems like the vast majority of human bodies are supposed to be able to. And then on the other one, there's like a social relationship that's a little bit different than like a physical disability is what I would say.
Okay, but again, like I go back to the point of a man not being able to give birth, because if they very well could have been born a woman. And then again, I point to intersex people where they may or may not be able
but a
to
man
give
not
birth,
giving
but
birth, the
clearly
function.
But sex is inherently a spectrum. So where on that spectrum is it a disability versus an ability that you should have? That's what I'm not really understanding. That's why I brought up intersex people. Because you want to say that, well, if you're past this threshold, all of a sudden it's a biological dysfunction.
Oh, hold on. There are traits related to sex that can be on a spectrum. But in terms of like being able to give birth or not, I think that that's like a pretty binary thing generally. Like male parts of a species generally don't have the ability to give birth of most.
But what I'm trying to say is that you want to say lack of ability to have birth is only a disability for men because that's what their function should be, right? But then intersex people, or people who don't fall into the male, female sexual binary, when does it become a disability for them?
You can't use post-traumatic growth in the wake of a disability.
It would have to depend. It would depend on the type of intersex person we're talking about. And intersex is like it's not like there's male, female, and intersex. I would need like a more specific example of what we're talking about when we have intersex.
The point I'm talking is that there's this huge spectrum.
No. Hold on. I disagree with this. I don't like the appeal to incredibly niche, incredibly hard to define, like very, very, very 0.00001% gray areas, and then using that to blow up the entire model. I don't think that's a fair approach.
But again, if you are making an essentialist argument about the natural functioning, these outlier cases, these deviations are quite literally the things that you have to point to.
Yeah, but chances are, if I can provide something that is explanatory for 99.9% of humanity, and you're going to give me a 0.1% exception, if my model or theory works perfectly for everything else, I'm going to find ways to make accommodations intellectually for those things, but I'm not going to change my description of 99.9% of everything else. It's unlikely.
But then, in a sense, you you agree with my tweet.
No.
Because, no, so. Because it's you're saying that because like what if, for example, 10% of people were intersex, 20% of people are intersex. These are very real things.
Yeah, wait, no. If that number were to grow and that seemed to be more of a natural thing for like human bodies tend to be, then I would view it a lot differently for sure.
Then it might no longer become a disability.
For sure.
Okay, so let's then point to people who, for example, are born, let's say that 90% of people are born with one limb and 10% are born with two limbs. Is it suddenly disadvantageous to be born with two limbs? Because everything in the world is meant for people with one limb.
Well, no, because you still can access everything in the world with one limb. I don't know how having the extra limb makes it a disability. It's the same thing I gave earlier with the eye color thing, where some people can see a few more colors because they have like an extra cone or whatever. I don't think that's necessarily a disability, even if the world is built.
No, but for example, like if I want to ride on like a roller coaster, or if I'm sitting in a chair, these chairs are going to be designed for people with one limb, not two. So there'd have to be accommodations made for people with two limbs so that they can put their other limb somewhere.
I understand what you're saying, but we're dipping back into like these are like social accommodations now, not like moving through the world.
That's the point. That's the whole point, is that it varies depending on the way society is structured. That's what I'm trying to point to.
But this was the point that I was saying, is that like I don't think that like when we look at like the function of the human body, I don't think I appeal all the time to societal construction there. I think that there are things that the human body could do and things that the human body might not be able to do. So like bending your arm, for instance. Like we might construct a society that ultimately accommodates people that have stiff arms that can't bend, but like if biologically our arms are supposed to bend and they can, but for some reason they don't for some people or whatever, like.
But you're saying like biologically supposed to. I mean, these are teleological claims that you're making. You're trying to tie what is right in a human body to some actual purpose, as though that's not inherently value laden, as though that is inherently dependent on the way society is already constructed.
Do you not think that there's any sort of inherent purpose to like the way that a body is designed or anything?
Of course, but no, of course, I don't believe in teleology. I don't believe in inherent the inherent purpose. Like, those are the type of arguments that.
So if we look at something very simply like your arm bending, you don't think that like there is a function there that it's supposed to serve, like your muscles are like it's.
We can have this because what metaphysically is a fucking purpose? I don't even know what that means unless it's relative to desires and goals of society or individual people. I think that's something that would somehow lay outside of.
What about when we talk about something like chlorophyll? Like the purpose of chlorophyll is to transform sunlight and fucking carbon dioxide in water into like oxygen or whatever and energy.
Yeah, but where does that purpose come from?
It's just the function of the thing. It's the thing that it's almost descriptive. No.
So you're treating the purpose as something that is like the idea of purposefulness is something that is just like irreducible. We should just all intuitively understand that there are certain things that are supposed to be like this and not supposed to be like this.
I'm looking at it like as a descriptive like reality, that some things that just do as they do, that some things just do. So, for instance, like when two,
happen. I agree. There's correlation.
No, not correlation. Okay, so like when you put two atoms of oxygen together, they form the molecule O2. That's like a thing that happens, and it's that's just how that works. And it is what it is, and it does what it does. Okay. Much the same that when you contract muscles in your arm, it flexes the arm. It causes your arm to move around a joint. It just is what it is. That's the function of that particular thing.
Okay, but you're saying instead of having, I don't want to have the whole metaphysical discussion about like teleology, but regardless, let's say that these are the natural functions. I don't know why they were designed this way. For example, you might point to evolution or something, but obviously I'm going to reject that. But the whole point is why is it inherently a bad thing if there is a deviation from the natural function? Shouldn't the question of whether it's bad or not be dependent upon how society is structured?
Yes.
Or rather,
I think. Okay.
Okay.
I hope we don't agree with this because this whole conversation was a huge waste of time. Then, okay.
How?
Wait, like, hold on. Wait. Okay. Wait. So maybe. Okay. So this might solve everything, but I hope not. Okay. So I don't. Okay. So, oh God, is it possible that we agree? But when I say disability, I'm not necessarily morally loading that word. I'm just saying that something is failing to fulfill its function, but morally or normatively, I don't have to say like a disability is necessarily bad.
But no one uses disability that way.
Well, hold on. Yeah, but I'm not talking about contemporary speech or whatever, because in this form, like we can have a disability, that doesn't necessarily have any bad things that go along with it. So for instance, earlier I gave the example of missing a pinky toe or a pinky finger. Like that, I would consider that like a kind of a disability, but is it really a bad thing? Probably not. I don't know if that's going to affect your impact your life too much. Or there might be some kinds of disabilities like tinnitus is a disability. But like, is it bad that you hear something? I mean, like it's a little annoying sometimes, but otherwise not really a huge disability. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily or that bad. So can we agree maybe that like, sure, these are disabilities, but like not a disability isn't like, doesn't have to be, depending on how our society is constructed, an intrinsically bad thing.
I think disabilities are related to barriers that people face. And so someone is going to be disabled if they face the types of barriers that other people don't face. I mean, I believe in like a social understanding of disability that comes a lot from group designation, as opposed to, again, what you were trying to do, which is some sort of, like, it seems like you've changed your position. I'm not trying to do like some gotcha, but you were talking a lot about biological function and lack of ability. Mm-hmm. And in this new definition that you've given, it's no longer about that. In fact, disability is something more confined to the way that society wants to view it and the individual goals.
Well, no, I'm still defining disability in the way that I did before, but I'm saying whether or not we call a disability bad or not is probably going to depend on the adaptation society has made to accommodate for that disability.
No one is going to define disability as lack of function, because there are a lot of things. And if that's the definition that you were using from the outset, I'd say that's pretty bad faith of you, because I don't know anyone ever, either in the literature or in real life, who would consider any kind of biological dysfunction to be a disability, right? It's a disability that gives rise to barriers, that gives rise to, like, for example, for me to qualify for any sort of disability benefits, to be diagnosed as having a disability, it has to be an impediment in my day-to-day life, right?
Well, but hold on. We're getting into different areas, because the like the disability that you have to file with the government might have like a different, like, I'm not here to argue that the disability that exists with the government is going to be different fundamentally than, or it's going to be the same fundamentally as like a philosophical argument for disability, right? That's like saying that, like, I think a pedophile is somebody that's attracted to prepubescent boys and girls, and then you saying, well, that's not really a pedophile because pedophilia is considered like having sex with a minor that could be 17. So therefore your definition is wrong, right? I don't know if I would agree with that, but
the CDC defines disability as any condition of the body or mind impairment that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them, right? So just
but that is. Even that definition is, the CDC doesn't even believe in that definition, kind of, because if we made a world hypothetically where wheelchair people could access everything the same way that non-wheelchair people could, I don't think the CDC would all of a sudden say, hey, being handicapped or being in a wheelchair is no longer a disability because we've got so many ramps.
If society was structured around people with wheelchairs, like, if 99% of people, like if 99.5% of people had no ability to walk, I would probably say that people walking are probably disabled in that society, because it's very hard to envision, but you have to imagine how everything in life would be fundamentally structured in a way to accommodate people in wheelchairs. Like going on the bus, for example, there probably wouldn't be chairs. There wouldn't be couches. Like the way that beds are made, you would have to go out and find things to accommodate you. You, as someone who's able to walk, is going to face just as many barriers as people currently do now in wheelchairs. That's just the way it would be.
Couldn't they just buy a wheelchair and use it anyway, though?
I mean, I guess so, but that's true. But that it's still true that is a very much a societally dependent thing, as opposed to a biological dysfunction that makes it a disability, right? So
I guess, like, yeah. So now the conversation has gotten a bit more confusing, because I guess I would say there's probably a difference in terms of, like, so here's what it feels like is happening in my brain. I'm not going to call you bad faith, even though you almost made that accusation to me. So it feels like I think a disability is a lack of a function in a body. And you're saying, well, a disability is a disability. So what you call a disability is what I would say is a bad disability. And what I would call a disability that has negligible effect in your day-to-day life, you would say that's not a disability. So like, it feels like we agree on almost everything, except there's a spectrum where I would say this is a disability all the way up to the worst. And you would say, well, hold on. What actually is a disability starts somewhere in the middle, because I fundamentally disagree with how you classify disability, and that's going to be a sliding scale based on what society can accommodate, basically.
Well, is Michael Phelps disabled?
No, but what inhibits him from normal day-to-day life?
No, but yeah.
Or what is the wait? What part of his body is inhibited just because he's got a long torso?
Hold on, no, but okay. Oh, he has very abnormal functioning that will probably put him at very higher risks for a ton of different, like tons of cardiac problems, like. There are a bunch of things that are a huge part of
no. For if that is the case, and it might be actually, then I would agree that could be a form of disability. For instance, I would say that we could argue that I think a lot of NBA players might have a form of disability in being really tall, because I think once you get, I could be wrong, but I think once you get past 6'4", the taller that you are past that point, I think you start running into a lot of like mid to late life issues with like joints and stuff, because bodies that are that tall start to break down or have problems in unique ways. So I could agree with that, sure. And I think actually, now that you mention this, I feel like I read an article about Phelps before where I think his body has a unique way of dealing with lactic acid buildup or something. So if that is the case, that later in life that manifests in a heart problem, then yeah, I could actually see it as potentially being maybe some kind of disability, sure.
Okay, so Michael Phelps is disabled because, like, let's just stick with the example of Michael Phelps, and I want to try to really see where our disagreement lay, okay? And you tell me where we start.
Michael Phelps. Okay, so here, this is a great example because now it's exploding the difference between our points of view. So I would say Michael Phelps is disabled because there's some part of the body that's not functioning the way that it should. But you would say, well, hold on, Destiny. I define disability in terms of your inability to engage with society in a good manner, or there's a barrier or something. But actually, this disability is enabling him to do things, so I wouldn't consider it a disability. Therefore,
forget about my definition. About my definition.
Okay.
Like, I want to.
I would still consider it a disability. So, for instance, let's say there's a huge contest for who can squat the most weight, and let's say that there's some guy whose fucking arms are ripped off, but he has another way of balancing the bar on his body. And let's say he can squat 20 pounds more than every other human being on earth because now he doesn't have to squat his arms. He's saving weight there, right? I would say that person has a disability because he's missing his arms, but it might be that disability enables him to live life in a way that is otherwise more beneficial than if he had the function of that particular thing.
Let me give you, like, let's say someone has 4 arms, right? And it
Sure.
doesn't come with any sort of strange, like, lack of ability in other places.
Sure.
Right?
It's only gaining function, yeah.
But let's say that they experience 20% more pain on average than the average person. Is that a disability? Yeah,
I would say so, because you have you're adding a negative there.
So as soon as there's even a little bit of a negative, it inherently, but they have all this extra ability.
Yeah, but you're incurring a bunch of negative stuff on top of that. So I would say it's a form of disability, sure.
What if it's 5% additional pain?
Even if it's a 1% additional pain? Now, I don't know how you would ever measure this, but the problem is pain is an incredibly personal sensation. It's hard to measure it, but...
Okay, but, like, can we not say that being blind brings with it a ton of extra pain as well? Seeing things that make you, like, feel horrible? And
wait, when you say being blind, you mean being able to see, right?
Or sorry, yes, being able to see would probably bring with it, like, you can imagine that... just because something brings with it like a little bit of extra pain, it's not very clear to me how that should make it a disability. That just doesn't seem correct to me. Like, especially if you're granting that it's allowing you to have a ton more ability, right? How is that a disability?
Well, because your body is like failing to function in a way that it's supposed to.
Disabled because on average, like, let's say that women are 20% more happier than men. Mm-hmm. Are men then disabled?
No.
Why?
Well, that's a really complicated question. Now I have to get into, well, why are people unhappy? Or like,
no, forget all that. Just
like, are you saying that by virtue of being a man intrinsically, I'm gonna pull a Vosh on you and say I can't. It's hard. It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to engage with happiness because happiness is incredibly subjective. Happiness is incredibly personal. It's hard to measure. I don't know if the happiness is caused by being a man or society. That question draws in like 50 other different parts that like muddle the fuck out of that analogy. It makes it really hard to engage with that one, I think.
Okay, well, but women, for example, live longer than men.
True.
Are men disabled?
No.
Why?
Because I think that fundamentally there has to be, for a species to exist and function, there are two types of like things, men and women.
But why do women have to live longer than men?
That might be part of the intrinsic experience of being a man. So for instance, I wouldn't say that being a child is disabled compared to being an adult, because fundamentally, like, being a child is part of the experience of growing into an adult, of being a functioning human being. It might be that the idealized function of a man is something that is just a little bit less in terms of happiness than the idealized function of a woman. But I wouldn't compare the two and say that they have to be the same or equal on every single thing. Otherwise, we could argue that women are disabled in a number of ways physically, right?
Well, yeah, no, but that's exactly sort of my point, is that the disability. But okay, let's go back to the Michael Phelps thing. So you said that part of the body is not functioning as it should.
He might have a disability that gives him an advantage in a competitive sense. Yes,
League is objectively better than philosophy. So you would want to
clarify. So you consider Michael Phelps disabled because he has functioning that deviates from the norm.
Potentially, sure, yeah. I'm only saying potentially here because I don't know what his exact issue is, right? But sure, potentially, yeah.
But let us grant that it deviates from the norm.
Yeah.
And that does bring with it certain drawbacks, such as a higher risk for cardiac disease, okay? Then I would ask, well, who is defining what someone should fundamentally be?
I feel like I've outpaced him intellectually.
Who decides what is the optimal functioning
God
of the human
does.
body?
I guess when I look into the world and I see the
outpaced
function of
intellectually.
what is a human body, or 99% of human bodies, it seems to be that there's some function that follows the form. And that would be what, yeah.
That's so vague. I have no idea what that means. I'll be honest.
If I look at how a plant turns sunlight and water and carbon dioxide, I think, or sunlight and carbon dioxide, I don't remember the shit, and maybe water into like oxygen and energy, like that's like the function of yes. Oh, photosynthesis. That is indeed what it is called, right? That is the function of what the plant performs following the form of a plant. A plant that can't do that would have some, and it doesn't have another way to create energy or whatever, right? It's failing.
It has been designed, not necessarily by God, but it just is so that
there is a design, yeah. That there is a function that follows the form of a thing. It seems to be the case.
And the function of humans is to procreate.
Well, that's a really humans are a much more humans are a much more complicated thing.
So I'm trying to figure out we're talking about human beings, and I'm trying to like. The reason I asked about humans is because I don't think we can point to
Sure, the problem is that like when you ask me in terms of like, is this thing a disability, we're like 7 levels of abstraction away. This is why originally I wanted to stay on physical disabilities, because like a physical disability is and that is what you said in your tweet, that even a physical disability shouldn't be a disability, because that's something where I can easily see a function that would follow a form. The ability for an eye to see something and then interpret that and then have the brain see an image. That's like a very easy, but when you start saying like, well, is being gay a disability, I have to ask like very big macro questions about like, well, what is the ultimate function of a human being? Is there an ultimate function of a human being? It gets way more complicated. Not like in a sense of like philosophically it's hard, but more just like I'm gonna have to do a lot of work mentally to figure out like all the different, like what I think the ultimate function. Like, yeah, go ahead.
But hey man, you seem to be changing your position here, because I asked you if you had 4 arms, which is going to increase your ability to do stuff. You will be way better at doing a ton of shit than people with 2 arms. You said that just because there's an additional 1% of pain, all of a sudden it is a disability.
Well, if you have to live with more pain, yeah. But the pain thing is just so hard, because pain is already an incredibly personal experience, and it's not like you can compare it to another type of pain, or that's just a way harder one to grapple with. But yeah, if you had an extra arm but it had some like drawbacks to it or whatever, then it's like, yeah, sure, this is probably a disability. But there might be some advantages that come with that disability potentially. Much the same way that somebody that can't see maybe has like a better sense of hearing or other ways to navigate the world that maybe give them an advantage in some regards.
But would you not say it would probably be we would as human beings be better off overall if we all had 4 arms, right? Even with the additional of 1% of pain.
Human beings be better off.
Probably, right?
I'm going to make some big godlike appealing to evolution here. My guess is going to be that we probably all wouldn't be better off. There's probably a reason why we don't all have 4 arms. That would be my guess.
Well, neither of us are qualified to make the statement on whether...
it might be the case that in today's world, maybe, yeah, actually, I guess. So, for instance, our digestive tract and our like breathing tract, we share, there's a lot of overlapping shit there, right? We breathe and we eat through the same hole, which is pretty shitty because you can choke on food and die because we can't breathe. That's pretty garbage. So if these were two separate things, then that would actually be really cool. But it's probably the fact that there is a huge increase in energy required to maintain two separate systems like that. And because of that energy requirement, we don't. But maybe in today's society where energy is way more freely available to humans, maybe that would be an advantage. So maybe somebody born like that wouldn't necessarily, I guess in my definition, be disabled. They'd be superhuman or something, but...
Okay, and just going back to Michael Phelps, you say he is inherently disabled because of his deviation from the biological norms, right?
Yeah, I guess if it manifests as some really negative thing, but maybe not. Maybe I'd have to rethink that, I guess, then. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so if 99% of people were born with the exact same type of condition that Michael Phelps is, with his abnormally long torso...
Yeah, maybe that becomes the new standard for dealing with lactic acid or something.
Is it no longer disability?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I would have to think about it, but... Keep in mind that for this conversation, every quote-unquote disability you're giving me are giving like superhuman things alongside of it, and people missing their fucking legs or their eyesight are not getting any of this stuff.
That's completely besides the point. Because
Michael Phelps is not gaining something because socially we've constructed blah blah blah. It's that he suffered some disability to some parts of his body to greatly excel the functions of other parts of his body. So,
but you still want to say that is it. I'm just trying to show that your definition of disability is wrong, because disability is something that is inherently dependent upon the way that society is structured.
But I don't think so, because Michael Phelps doesn't have anything to do with how society is structured. Like his quote unquote disability is boosting other intrinsic functions.
I don't think he is disabled.
Well, but even if I say he's disabled, which I think, because earlier in my definition I would.
I think almost everyone would say that Michael Phelps is not disabled, by the way.
Okay, you can't appeal there when I would say, well, every single person on the planet Earth would say every blind person, every deaf person, every...
I can see that.
Sure.
But, like, again, like, if you are acknowledging that whether or not he is going to be disabled is dependent upon the biological normalcy, then that is...
when you're substituting for biological normalcy, though, I guess I'm looking at more that, like, some function seems to follow some form. And maybe like the form can change over time, and which would give rise to different functions. So
I don't know what do you mean I don't know what you mean by that.
What part of that don't you understand?
Like what is biological form?
The form of a thing. So
like how, like its shape?
There are a certain set of hold on. Let's take a step back. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay.
No, I promise you I don't know what you mean.
If I present you with a certain object, or a certain construction of a thing, okay? There are certain actions. There are going to be a limited set of actions that particular thing could take, right? If I give you a pulley and a rope, you can pull the rope up and down the pole. Like there's a certain amount of functions that will follow the form of a thing. No? Yes?
Maybe I'm just being really, really stupid, but there's a ton of things you can do with a pulley and a rope. You can do...
Okay, if I point to an arm, and I say that I can flex a muscle and I can move my forearm up and down around a joint, right? There are a limited number of functions that I can perform given a certain form. Do you agree with that or not?
Right. So, I can't walk with my ears. Okay. I understand what you mean. Like, form just, I think I connect form with a very different kind of, but no, I understand what you're saying. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
Sure. So, like, when certain forms exist, and they're unable to perform the functions that it seemed like they should be able to perform. So, for instance, if I give you an elbow, forearm, and then an upper arm, and then I like fuse the bone together, and it can no longer flex, even though some of the form is there, seems to be like there's an issue there. There's like some form of disability there. It's not functioning as it should.
Okay, functioning as it should.
As in some function should follow the form of a thing. Yeah.
What? Why?
I don't. That's a good question. Ask God. I don't know why.
No, but this is sort of pointing to my point, is that it's inherently value dependent, and what it should do seems to be very dependent on the values we ascribe to things. For example, do we think that? Oh, what's a good example? Do we think that? What's a very famous poison?
Nightshade.
Nightshade. Do we think that?
It's a poisonous plant, but I don't know if it'll kill.
Okay, something like or hemlock. Do we think that hemlock should kill us if it's ingested?
I mean, if that's the interaction that it has, like biochemically with us, then I mean, yeah, that would be the function following the form,
Yeah,
no?
but that's just because it is. It is that way. But you're wanting to draw the extra step here to that's the way it should be. And a deviation from that is a disability. You're trying to bridge the gap between the way that it currently is to what it actually should be. What it's been
I don't know if
designed to
I
do.
don't know if in any of my analysis, so maybe you can point this out if I'm incorrect. I don't know if I'm trying to invoke any amount of like normativity or moral loading in anything I'm saying. But maybe you would say that I should if I say something. I'm trying to maintain like a descriptive level here, and that's it. Where like a thing that can do this thing, like this is the like it seems to be that given a certain number of things. Well, no, hold on. Let me think about it for a second. Because if something is deviating from that, then the form almost necessarily changes, right?
Yes. But like again, I gave you the example of 99% of people being born with 4 arms, right? All of a sudden having 2 arms.
The issue with some of the analogies is that like it's hard to imagine that you can have like extra arms without there being other big drawbacks. Like if literally you could have 4 arms and there are no other drawbacks anywhere else, and like that is like that maybe that would be the optimal form of a human being. That might be the case.
Or 6 arms.
Sure. There might be some forms that are like superhuman or optimal or whatever that like very few people have. Some women, for instance, have I don't know what it's called, but there are some women that are produce naturally like higher testosterone than others, and when they start like working out, they get very strong very quickly. Maybe that's more optimal than the other women that don't have that. Like,
it's very clear to me that human beings have not been designed optimally. In fact, I don't think anything is designed optimally. And secondly, I don't even know what the fuck that means.
Well, sure, because optimally begs the question of if there's an optimal design, then there's an end goal. Sure, I don't know if there's like an optimal design of a human.
Well, you said said earlier.
Yeah, I don't know. Hold on. I don't know if there's an optimal form of a human being, but it seems like there is like some like function that follows like a form given a form, and there's like 99% of things like fill into this category.
But you said earlier that you can imagine the ideal human.
Yeah, but the ideal human, I guess, isn't the one that's like the most morally best or what a human should be. But like, given like how all human bodies are, like I can imagine there is like an idealized form that performs all the functions that like a human being should. But I guess like I could also envision like a better human or something that's more like the ideal human has like 4 legs and 4 arms and 2 hearts.
Human beings are going to keep evolving, so maybe we will develop like 4 more arms. Why are we relegating ourselves to our current point in if we're able to sort
it's not maybe the form of a human changes over maybe the form of a human changes over time. I don't know, that's possible,
right? And so you wanted to say that are you now saying that Michael Phelps isn't inherently disabled because of the deviation?
I guess it would depend on the level of negative effects that he incurs. Maybe he's actually just superhuman and he's not disabled.
Well, okay, now it's about the negative effects. Well, I don't understand. Well,
wait, hold on, because it's always been about negative impacts that occurred as well. For instance, like the people with the extra eye color sensory doesn't necessarily like incur like any negative harm just because they see a few extra colors. So there's not like a negative thing there.
You can't say that you're not making normative claims and then all of a sudden say that it has to do with negative impacts.
Well, negative impacts isn't where negative impacts are things that inhibit the normal functioning of the form, right?
But negative. I think that's almost like a circular definition, because if you're saying that a dysfunction from like the bodily norms are harmful or are bad, you can't say that they're bad because they are harmful.
I don't know if I've ever used the word harmful, unless you're saying by me saying that they can't do something, that's what makes it harmful?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe. You know what? Perspective Philosophy would love to debate you on this because he's in chat clamoring for it.
I understand, and it's going to be some Hegelian.
It's going to be Hegelian.
My shit was bad. Oh my god, he's going to be talking about the being in itself and the
there you go.
Geist that I'm just.
Okay, well listen, you can go scream at him. Is there anything else you want to chat about?
I don't know. I'd be interested in having the second discussion about whether there's anything intrinsically bad about disabilities, but I feel like we've
well, intrinsically bad is we'll probably agree a lot more on that, and that intrinsically bad, I mean, I'll say anything that inhibits your ability to live a happy, healthy life and contribute to society in a way that makes you happy and healthy is probably a bad thing, but that's going to depend on how well society can accommodate for certain things.
So there is nothing intrinsically bad about being blind.
Intrinsically bad, Probably not. I don't know. I think I'd have to go pretty far.
I'm glad to have that on record. You hear that, chat? If you're blind, it's not inherently bad. Stay mad.
Sure, okay. But like but I would still call it a disability. Like, I mean, I could envision people living happy, healthy, fine lives and shit while being blind or even deaf. But. Okay.
All right, look, this has been good. I won't keep you any longer. I'm sure we'll talk again sometime in the future. But yeah, thanks for having the convo. I think it was productive.
Productive
in any case.
Reproductive. I'm just gonna. Okay, have fun. Be careful. Okay.
I don't even understand the joke, but okay. Bye.
Bye. Jesus.